Let's record. So I had been active in anti-bias work in academia for years, but it was always, it was mostly focused, it was actually not mostly, it was all focused in the way past on women in academia. I'm in a STEM field where there are not many women. There are also non-STEM fields with gender imbalance issues. And over the years, I kept thinking, well, it's not just our problem to solve. Men need to solve this problem too. It's everybody's problem. Women can't be the only ones complaining that there are no women in academia. Well, one, because there are no women in academia, so they're not there to complain, but also because it's everybody's problem. And about 2 years ago, it suddenly dawned on me in this, like, like this flashbulb moment. I was like, oh my God, how did I not apply this same thinking to racism? So I am white, Jewish, not American, I'm Israeli. I also have dual citizenship now, so I feel like a foreigner here, but there's plenty of racism in my country as well. Absolutely plenty. And I never thought that it was my job to work on that, because I had the privilege to not think of that because I'm white. And so that's me. That's why I'm here. And that's where I'm starting my work from in the last 2 years. And we'll continue the introductions now, and then later we will tell you a little bit about the goals for today, and we'll tell you a little bit more about the kind of work that we have done, and we'll hear about work that you've done. But I'll shut up now and pass it on to, I cannot remember if we had like an order for this, and I now don't have the document in front of my face. Let me pull the document up.
It might be me.
Yes, okay, Scott,
Okay.
It is you. Go ahead.
Well, thanks for starting us off. Hi, I'm Scott Mirabile. I am an associate professor of psychology at the St. Mary's College of Maryland. It's a small public liberal arts honors college in Southern Maryland. And I think, like Yael, I've been involved in some anti-racist work for a while, but it really did kick off dramatically a couple of years ago with Academics for Black Lives. And I've just been really fortunate to get to know Yael and Jackie on a project we've been working on to hear more about in a little bit, and just have some great collaborators on my campus willing to jump in and do the work and support each other. And so I'm excited to talk about that work and hear what folks here are doing too. So I'll pass it off to, I think, Jackie's next.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm Jackie Rose. I'm a professor in behavioral neuroscience in the Department of Psychology at Western Washington University. I'm also the associate chair of this department, so it's kind of a fun task. And as a department, we've been working a lot in terms of bringing or putting a spotlight or a mind towards equity, diversity, inclusion within our department. And so Western Washington University is a primarily undergraduate institution. It's also a primarily white institution. And so there are some fun challenges to that, but I enjoy doing these things. I've met, obviously, Scott and Yael from working with Academics for Black Lives, but I enjoy working with people who are interested and dedicated to this work, because I don't always have those people around me in my everyday academic life. So it's like you can kind of have this side gig going that keeps you inspired and encouraged to keep moving forward. And I see Lena also from my school there. Hi, just shout out to you. And that's me. Thank you. I don't remember who's next. Is it Lauda?
It's Ed.
Oh, hi everyone. I'm Ed Clayton. I'm the director of training at the Princeton Neuroscience Institute. My job's pretty much exactly like it sounds. I'm kind of an interface between the faculty, the institute, and our trainees, our graduate students, our postdocs, and our summer interns, our research assistants. And I said this the other day, and I don't know if I scared Yael or I amused Yael, but I really feel like my job here is to make sure that all of our trainees leave P&I mentally and spiritually intact. Graduate school's a little tough, postdoc's tough, being a research assistant's tough. I've been through that. I can help from time to time, and that's kind of what I try to do here. And I'm excited to tell you about some of the other things that I've been doing, especially with Yael and some of the things that we've been doing as of late. So thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Bustamante. I just like a month ago graduated from the Neuroscience program at Princeton, and I am Cuban American. My parents were immigrants, and let's see, I grew up in Massachusetts, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania for undergrad. So I would definitely say I come from a place of a lot of privilege with the kind of institutional resources and all that. I think that I really share everyone's sentiment about 2 years ago being a really big milestone. I also did the academics for Black Lives, and I really consider myself still very much learning, kind of not the expert, but very much taking people for their word on their lived experiences. I think what has happened in my journey has been understanding and recognizing more of my privileges. I learned a way to talk about my skin color as white presenting, and some privileges that I'm afforded, even though I also identify as Latina. Yeah, anyway, so I'm excited for this kind of format because I think some of the best, most invigorating and kind of best things you can do to make you feel like you have agency and can actually do something is finding these spheres of influence, like your workplace, other academics, and really trying to see where you can push the needle.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. So to kick us off, so 2 years ago, as I mentioned, we had an event, an allyship event. I just put the Google Doc with the summary of that in the chat. You don't have to go there now, but just in case you want it. And what we talked about there, we talked about common microaggressions. We talked about common failures as allies, sense of omissions. We talked about sources of systemic racism. And if you look at the kind of the list that I linked to, which is a short summary of what was discussed in that event, we're all familiar with these microaggressions. We're familiar maybe from, being on the receiving end, maybe from seeing them happen, and maybe from not even noticing that someone is interrupted all the time or being spoken over all the time, or their contributions, the contribution of some person seems less valuable than contributions of others. And that's our sense of omissions as allies. And I'm really interested in the sources of systemic racism and what we can do really systemically in academia. And we discussed that too. I was looking at this list today and thinking, some things have changed. Some things have already changed. So in 2 years, we have gone some way towards where we want to be. And we're talking about dismantling hundreds of years of racism, right? So we can't expect it to happen in a day or two or a year or two, but we need to be in the process. We need to be in the process all the time. And what we wanted to do today is to encourage each other to be in this process, to give each other ideas of what we can do as individuals, what we can do within our spheres of influence, because each of us, whether we're a research assistant, a student, a training coordinator, a faculty, department chair, in all of our roles, we have different spheres of influence. And when we start thinking broadly, what can we do? We can do a lot. And especially if we all do this together, we can do a lot and we can achieve a lot. So what we wanted to do is start by telling you a few things. So just to start the conversation, each of us will share 2-3 things that we have done in the last 2 years with dismantling racism, especially anti-Black racism, but racism in general in academia in mind. So we're focusing on academia today since that's what brought us together. And after we share, we will go to breakout rooms and discuss for a few minutes what you have been doing. And, if you feel like I haven't been doing much, that's okay. We all feel like we haven't been doing much. Sometimes you've been doing more than you know. And sometimes, there's always a good time to start, better start today. And so the goal is to bring up even small things, to lay out a menu of where you can start, and start where it's comfortable for you to start. The anti-racism work, the goal is, especially for white people, we need to become uncomfortable. But, if that discomfort will make you not even start, well, start with where you're just a tiny bit uncomfortable, doing something a little bit out of your usual comfort zone, and then go from there and build it up. We've all done that, and it becomes easier, and you see the fruits of your labor, and you see how what you do is helpful to your colleagues, to your friends, to your Black colleagues, to people who have suffered in silence for a long time, or not even in silence, but have just been at the receiving end of racism for a long, long time. And this is not, we will save them. I don't mean to say it that way, but becoming friends with people and seeing that they appreciate that you are there for them, that you're an ally, that's real reward. And the rewards are there. And then seeing the institution change, seeing GREs drop, things like that. So, okay, they dropped because of COVID, but let's keep them down. Let's not put GREs back on the table. Some of us are in positions to argue for that, etc. So anyway, let's start. So why don't you start us off, Jackie?
Yeah, so I'll just list a few things. I definitely want to give the example of just starting where you're at. I teach a course in learning and memory, and a couple of things that I've done in that course, well, actually 2 or 3 things. Anyway, with the field of learning and memory, of course, and most fields, chapter 1 always starts out with this historical background, and people kind of just flip through it and accept it. But I'd like to now emphasize, like, here's chapter 1. This is as far as we got when we listened to people we thought of as experts, and it's a very limited range of people. And so moving on to further chapters, usually you start to see more of a diversity of scholarship in the field, and you also get an expansion of the things that we learned. Like, if we knew everything from what this small elite group of white men thought back in the 1800s, we would be done at the end of chapter 1. So kind of contextualizing that for the students, but then a couple other things, of course, trying to go beyond the textbook and incorporate BIPOC scholars, particularly one I'm really interested in. A webinar I use right now in my learning course is the one from the Brain Behavior Research Foundation of Dr. Addy at Yale, talking about addiction, and we focus on the learning component. And it's just really to incorporate, like, this is what it looks like today, and to get some representation, but also for students to appreciate all the different places and faces that expertise comes from. And then I guess the other thing I'd say about in my classes is that I do intentionally meet with all of the students in my classes. I know that's hard to do when you have big classes, but sometimes what I do with bigger classes is I break them up into groups and meet them in smaller groups, but I introduce myself personally. And then I ask them to introduce themselves, ask them, what name would they like me to call them? Is there anything they'd like me to know about their experience or what's going on for them for this class? And some really interesting information comes out in terms of, sometimes it's just a matter of access to resources. An example would be students who are rural, who are relying on satellite connections for their internet. I didn't really appreciate that they were challenged in a way that I wasn't thinking of in terms of accessing the course and course materials. So I just wanted to throw out some really small things. Obviously, being in administration, I have opportunities to do much larger things. So I'll leave it there, because otherwise I think I could create a bit of an avalanche.
Thanks, Jackie. I was just writing in the chat that I also meet with my students one-on-one, but didn't really think of that as related to dismantling racism in academia. And now you've given me a new lens on an activity and thinking what to talk to them about and what that accessibility can mean. So thanks for that. Scott, do you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. I'll share some small things and maybe a bigger thing or two. So along with Jackie and Yael and a few other folks that I met in 2021, we've been working on a project to help typically tenured faculty write recommendation letters for tenure promotion processes as an external reviewer. That seemed to us as a point where individual scholars are advanced in their career enough where they have the kind of power and agency to write those letters in ways that make sense to them. And that individuals have a lot of power as letter writers in that process, right? You can respond to the question, but you can also write whatever you want to write. When someone says, hey, review someone's scholarship, let us know what you think about them. And so we've been tackling this question of how do we write those letters from an anti-racist standpoint? And over the course of this past year, we've been working on the manuscript. It is a preprint. I can share the link to that in a second. And it's under review at eLife. And we're hopeful that this work will start to slowly change just one aspect of that process, right? That we looked for places where we didn't need to change cultures or institutions. We could just ask individuals to do something differently. And so we think that that work fits in really well right there. Thanks for sharing that in the chat. So that's a kind of big thing. I mean, it took a year to get that, and it's still not fully done, most likely, and it'll kind of keep changing over time. Some other stuff that I've been really fortunate to have great colleagues in my department to work on with. I helped co-found one of our departmental IDE committee, Inclusive Diversity Equity, and we recognized pretty quickly that new faculty in our department needed like a soft landing, right? They needed a way to kind of easily enter our department, enter our culture, enter our college, our broader community in the area. We're Southern Maryland. It's a very small area. It's a very rural area. And so we put this website together to help them learn about their new colleagues, right? Like, what can they ask us about? What do we like talking about, right? I've got a picture of myself and my dog on there. I say, hey, talking about building a shed or woodworking or gardening, right? So it's not just this kind of stiff, we're just professional colleagues, but it's kind of letting them know, hey, we're people, we have interests and we'd love to share them with you. Resources in the area, links to official resources at the college, definitions for common acronyms that folks would throw out there in faculty meetings. They have no idea what that letter means or what that word means. So all kinds of little things. It's almost like the hidden curriculum for new faculty, kind of taking the veil off of that. So that welcome website had launched last year. Our 2 new faculty loved it. They really benefited from it. And the other thing I'll mention, it's very early stages right now. We've been talking with students in our program about the kinds of community building resources and support they might benefit and they might want to have. And so we're in the early stages of developing a peer mentoring program to build community and build kind of academic support for our BIPOC psychology majors. That's going to be a multi-year process, but I'm really excited about it. So yeah, that's some of the stuff I've been doing. I'll turn it back to Yael.
Thanks so much, Scott. Ed, do you want to continue from here?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I think the one thing that I do that I take the most joy out of and where I think I make the biggest difference is Princeton Neuroscience Institute has a summer internship program primarily for students from historically underrepresented and excluded groups. We bring them every summer when we can. We even do it virtually for a 9-week research experience. And I took this over about 6 years ago. And when I first started, there were very few interns. There was very little money to support it. It basically consisted of faculty talks and a MATLAB course and then research experience. And I was there if you wanted to ask me questions and, you know, help you out in any way that I could. But I have to admit, I was more passive than I was active in managing it. And I say that because one thing that became very clear is that, yes, we have a research experience for these students, but we're actually not telling them anything about graduate school. We're not actually telling them anything about academic life, navigating everything that's involved in that, from the very act of having a research mentor, getting a letter of recommendation, what school is best for me, what school is going to support me as the person that I am, not as the person that they expect me to be. How do we do that? And so over time, it's developed into kind of a massive thing with a lot of moving parts, but a central part of it now is that there's a lot more active role for me and other people at the Institute in mentoring these students and getting them ready for, the career that they want to do. And most of these students are from small liberal arts colleges. And so there's not a lot of interaction with graduate students. There's not a lot of interaction with the research mentor. And we all know all of the possibilities for those kinds of relationships. And so they have very little guidance. And so one of the things that I can provide, being an old white guy, is I can tell them, this is how it is. This is how it is for a traditional student. This is how it might be for you. These are the things that you have to look out for from the very beginning. And these are the ways that you're going to manage these relationships moving forward. And so a lot of my focus at PNI and at Princeton and here is really promoting diversity and equity for all of these students. One of the other things that I've done since I've been here, I was the initial chair of our Climate and Inclusion Committee. One of the things that really came out of that is that a lot of the students and trainees, graduate students and postdocs came to me with other ideas. For example, we have a student-led organization called EPSP, which is Empowering Diversity and Promoting Scientific Equity at PNI. We also have Brainwaves, which is Brain Women Advocating Visibility and Equity in Science. Now, one of the things that I will not do is take credit for these organizations and the hard work that the people have done, but sometimes you need a link between that group and the administration, and that's one of the things that I've been happy to provide. One of the things that I do when people come to me is, how can I do this? And I say, well, first of all, I support you, and let me tell you the different ways that we can do it, both manpower, woman power, and financial resources. And that's one of the things that I've really, taken great pride in trying to help PNI become the place that we want it to be, not the place that necessarily is at this specific moment in time. So I'll stop right there.
Thanks so much, Ed. Let me take it from here. Allowed to ask to be last again. Last but not least. So I'll start with the smallest thing that I've done, or maybe one of the smaller ones, which is to diversify my Twitter who I follow on Twitter, to start following more people of color, more LGBTQ folks, and to the point where it's a whole other conversation that I'm now part of and can learn about and can find out what the issues are and how I can be an ally. And it's interesting because a friend of mine, her son is transitioning, and when she told me about this, I said, oh, I follow a lot of trans people on Twitter. And she said, what? I was like, I do. So I now know a lot about, not a lot, but I have some information for you and people to connect you to if you would like, etc. And it suddenly, I looked at who I'm following. And I was like, oh wow, this is way different than what it was a few years ago. So that's one thing that I did. Another thing, inspired by that event that we had 2 years ago here, it seemed like a lot of where we could intervene and help make academia more inclusive, more welcoming, more just less racist, basically, more equitable, was through mentoring. That as students and trainees not become more diverse, but we admit more diverse students, because there were always diverse people, we just didn't let them in. As we reduce the gatekeeping, faculty are still predominantly white, predominantly male, and we need to do things differently than we did previously in order to better serve all the people who are now being educated in our institutions. So I created a mentoring course, a full semester mentoring course together with another faculty member. We taught it, Laura was actually in my course. We taught it to graduate students and postdocs who were mentoring people at the time. Then we taught it to faculty. We're going to teach it again to faculty. Some of our students are here, Yael, maybe others. So that's been really big, and I really hope that will have an impact. And on a different level, but also thinking about teaching, I started an inclusive teaching committee in my department. That committee is mostly, it's students, graduate students, administrators, and now we're 2 faculty there. We used to be just me as faculty. But I've learned so much from the students on that committee, what they need to make our classes more inclusive, from unpacking the hidden curriculum to accessibility of materials, to the syllabus and the context, the content and the syllabus, and how we frame things and what we teach. And we've been sharing this with the faculty. So in our faculty meeting, we have like an inclusive teaching corner, which is like 3 minutes, in which we give practical tips once a month to faculty that they could adopt in their classes. So trying to move the needle little by little. Laura.
Thanks, Yael. Yeah, so I asked to go after Yael and Ed because I have participated in some of the things that they've done. And as a graduate student, having staff, faculty, actually, trying to make change, challenging how things are, was actually huge. Just to feel comfortable to say, oh, okay, maybe I can speak up about something. So anyways, I guess the things that I did, I wouldn't call it small because it was a big time commitment, but I think more on the learning side, and definitely what I learned in a few different types of courses I did. I did academics for Black survival and wellness that people have mentioned, and it just kicked off. So people might have the opportunity to register for this year. I also did one called My Work to Do, which was more a space for white people to have kind of like honest reflections, conversations, like just figure out like where they are at on even just like the first order basis. It started kind of the same time period. So that was something quite interesting. And I also did an inclusive leadership course at Princeton that was more broadly, it wasn't only about anti-Black racism, but was more broadly about kind of, different ways that we can structure workplaces to be more inclusive. For example, questioning standards of professionalism, but there's a whole kind of industry on that. It also was very, very related to industry fields and how they recruit more diverse candidates and retain. Anyways, with all this stuff, when I was kind of learning and reading, a really huge part of it was having this accountability group that I met with. And another term that I learned for it is a community of practice. And so I think, even today here in this room, maybe you know someone or a couple people or would like to know better. If you can make that connection, what I found is, things would just come up over the year. And hey, during the pandemic, I have a Black student and they seem to be really struggling with classes and they have these like huge burdens on their families, and how can I support them? Because maybe someone in the group was an administrator or a faculty member, their professor. And even just being able to talk things out like that and be bringing what we were learning about anti-racism into these everyday examples has been really awesome, even though each one of those things is kind of pretty incremental. And the other thing I was definitely doing was bringing my excitement, enthusiasm, and interest to conversations with colleagues, friends, and family. And I think as non-Black people, that is one of the things that we can do is, start learning, not making it so that people of color have to teach us, but actually take an active role learning ourselves. and then actually sharing what we're learning. So that was one that I thought I'd share, and other people might feel like, yeah, I do that. And I think that is something meaningful. The other thing that I do is I took Yael's mentorship class, and it really was a best practices course, very much informed by kind of like theory and research in the area of education and pedagogy and mentoring. And I mentored for that summer program that Ed runs. I was also a participant in about 3 of those as an undergrad, and it definitely prepared me for graduate school and kind of helped me get in. So I really value those programs. So if you have one of them, you can consider mentoring there. And not just mentoring as you would do it, but mentoring if you can get your hands on resources to try to figure out how can you tailor it to your students' identities. You know, don't be colorblind, instead be informed and do an even better job and tailored job to your historically excluded, underrepresented students. For example, I had a really outstanding Black student do a senior thesis with me, and I was nominating them for awards, talking them up to potential future faculty they could work with. And we continue to stay in touch and checking in now that they're in graduate school. So that's in respect to, you know, relationships that I have, and kind of Yael was mentioning that you can also be seeking out in your own circles. And then the last one, I think is not about racism itself exactly, but I have been trying to integrate this, is that I've been doing a lot of self-studying on disability. I've been really trying to consider issues of intersectionality related to disability, and I've been kind of trying to lead by example by talking openly about my own lived experience with disability. I did it in a panel, and I also kind of spoke about it in my dissertation defense that just happened. And, you know, with respect to intersectionality, of course, it's hard to be a disabled academic. It's even harder to be a disabled academic with multiple marginalized identities. And from the intersectionality principle of, you know, if you're giving access, lifting up, removing the gatekeeping for people with multiply marginalized identities, it's bringing everyone up in that process. And so I've learned a lot from Twitter on that, and other reading. And after I did my dissertation defense, I had younger people, RAs, undergrads, younger graduate students reach out and kind of say, you know, they felt seen, I think. So yeah, those would be my couple of things.
Thanks, everybody. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into breakout rooms of 4 people each, just for 10 minutes, to kind of like, you know, these small accountability groups or communities of practice, to talk about what you've been doing, what you want to do, what you can get ideas from others. And I'll tell you, in our community of practice, in our accountability group, we usually it's very informal. We're always like, oh, well, you know, I didn't do much in the last month, but, you know, actually, because we meet once a month, and then when someone starts talking, suddenly we realize, oh, well, maybe I did do something. So and maybe I could use some advice on how to push this forward. So that's the goal. So don't feel intimidated. This isn't like, let's set the bar low here. Talk about anything. We have a Jamboard for you to take notes on. Keep in mind that that's going to be, the notes can be seen by others as well. Later, when we come back and have our conversation about this, we will turn off the recording, so you don't have to be, you know, live to the world.